Before we dive into today's story, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Here we reveal the untold side of fame. The Hong Kong summer of 1985 hit like a furnace blast. 7 stories up on this shopping mall rooftop in Causeway Bay, I could feel the heat radiating off the concrete below. My shirt was already soaked through, and we hadn't even started rolling cameras yet. "Jackie, you really sure about this one?" Peter, my assistant director, was doing his best to sound casual, but I caught the tremor in his voice. He'd worked with me long enough to recognize the difference between my standard stunts and the ones that made grown men reach for their prayer beads. I wiped sweat from my palms and studied the clock tower across the street. The minute hand pointed straight up, perfect positioning for what I had planned. "It's just like Harold Lloyd did in Safety Last," it told him. Lloyd used camera angles and a stunt double. Well, that's the difference between us and Hollywood. Truth was, my gut felt like I'd swallowed a live snake. This wasn't normal pre-stunt jitters. Something felt wrong about the whole setup, like the universe was trying to whisper a warning I wasn't smart enough to hear. 3 months back, my father had pulled me aside after I'd gotten stitched up from a glass stunt gone sideways. Nothing major, just needed a few stitches where a window panel had caught me wrong. Bud looked at me with those tired eyes, older than his 63 years. "Son, you have money now. People know your name. What more do you need?" I'd brush him off with some joke about how Death was a terrible dancer who couldn't keep up with my moves. But lying awake at 3 a.m., staring at ceiling cracks in my cramped apartment, his words kept echoing back. "Crew's set downstairs," Samo called out, huffing as he climbed onto the roof. My old classmate from the China Drama Academy was built like a tank, but moved with surprising grace. Years of opera training never leave your bones. "Insurance companies been calling. They want to know exactly what you were planning up here." I couldn't help laughing. If I told them, they'd have me committed. Samo wasn't smiling. "Jackie, I've watched you jump off buildings, crash through glass, get lit on fire, but today feels different." Wrong. He was right, and we both knew it. Even Lu Wei, my stunt coordinator, a man whose body was basically a museum of broken bones and surgical scars, had approached me twice with suggestions for safer alternatives. The stunt itself was beautifully simple and completely insane. Jump from the mall rooftop, grab the clock tower's minute hand, hang there as the mechanism gave way under my weight, then fall through a series of canvas awnings to the street below. 7 stories of free fall with nothing but timing and canvas to keep me breathing. I'd run the calculations dozens of times. At my weight, 140 pounds, I'd be moving about 35 miles per hour when I hit that first awning. Each piece of canvas had to tear at exactly the right moment, in precisely the right pattern, to slow my descent without snapping my spine like a matchstick. "Sir, the director's ready when you are." Tommy, one of our junior crew members, approached nervously. Kid couldn't be more than 22, still had that wide-eyed look of someone who thought making movies was all glamour and glory. Down on the street, a crowd had gathered behind police barriers. I could see news crews setting up their equipment, reporters probably writing 2 different stories, depending on how the next 10 minutes played out. "You know what gets me?" I said to Samo. "Half these people are here hoping I succeed. The other half are just waiting for the show, whatever that turns out to be. That's the price of doing what we do," he said simply. It was true. My entire career was built on that razor's edge between triumph and disaster. Every stunt was a gamble where the stakes kept getting higher. Years later, I'd understand that the audience wasn't necessarily hoping I'd fail. They were drawn to witnessing something real in an industry built on illusion. But in that moment, standing on the edge of 7 stories of empty air, it felt like the whole world was holding its breath to see which way I'd fall. I started my ritual, the same routine I developed over years of pushing my body past its limits. Stretch the shoulders and back first. They'd absorb most of the impact when I caught the clock hand. Deep breathing exercises to flood my system with oxygen and calm the adrenaline storm building in my chest. "Pain is temporary," I whispered to myself. Master used old lesson from our brutal training days at the opera school. He'd beaten that philosophy into us with bamboo canes during exercises that would have hospitalized most kids. Strength from pain lasts forever. But what if this time the pain wasn't temporary? The sun had reached its peak, turning the rooftop into a skillet. My palms were sweating again. I wiped them on my shirt, then immediately second-guessed myself. Had I just made them more slippery? Jackie. Peter approached one final time, and I could see the weight of responsibility in his eyes. As your assistant director and your friend, are you absolutely certain about this? I looked at this man who'd helped carry me to hospitals more times than either of us wanted to count, who'd sat through surgeries and recoveries and watched me heal just so I could break myself again. Peter, if I take the safe road now, then everything we've built becomes a lie. He nodded slowly, understanding passing between us without words. Then let's make sure you live through it. The entire crew went quiet as I walked to the edge of the building. 7 stories below, unforgiving concrete waited. Across the gap, the clock tower stood like an ancient challenge, its minute hand pointing toward heaven. I took one last look at the faces surrounding me. Samo with his worried frown, Peter maintaining his professional composure, the crew members caught between admiration and horror. These people had chosen to follow me into madness, trusting my judgment even when it defied everything rational. Roll cameras. The red light blinked on, and suddenly the world narrowed to just 3 elements. Me, the clock tower, and 7 stories of empty air waiting to either catch me or crush me. This was the moment where years-soft training collided with physics and fate. I backed up 10 paces from the edge, feeling my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The solid concrete beneath my feet felt reassuring, safe, a security I was about to abandon for nothing but hope and momentum. Behind me, I could hear the crew holding their breath, some whispering prayers in languages I didn't recognize, but whose meaning transcended words. I filled my lungs with what might be my last breath as a living man rather than a cautionary tale. Then I started running toward the edge, toward everything that had led me to this moment. 7 steps to the precipice. 6. 5. The wind caught my hair. 4. The crowd below seemed to sense what was happening. 3. 2. 1. And then I was airborne, suspended between earth and sky, with nothing but timing and luck to determine whether I'd walk away from this or be carried away on a stretcher. Time stretched like taffy the moment my feet left the rooftop. 7 stories of empty air opened beneath them, and for one crystalline instant, I wasn't falling yet, just floating in that impossible space between safety and catastrophe. The world below seemed to pause, waiting to see if physics or fortune would claim me first. The clock tower rushed toward me faster than my brain could process. Wind whipped through my hair, and I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears, drowning out everything else. The crew's gasps, the crowd's collective intake of breath, even the city noise that had been constant background music all morning. My hands reached out, grasping for the minute hand of the clock. For a terrifying split second, I thought I'd miscalculated. The brass surface looked impossibly far away, like trying to grab moonbeams. Then my fingers made contact with the metal, and I clamped down with every ounce of strength I'd built up over 15 years of training. The impact nearly ripped my arms from their sockets. Pain exploded through my shoulders like white-hot lightning. The minute hand wasn't designed to support the weight of a grown man traveling at 30 miles per hour, and I could feel the ancient mechanism screaming in protest. Metal groaned, gears shrieked, and somewhere deep inside the clock tower, something vital was giving way. 4-3 heartbeats. I hung there suspended between earth and sky. My entire body weight supported be nothing more than my grip and a piece of Victorian engineering that was older than my grandfather. My shoulders felt like they were being pulled apart by invisible hands. Every muscle fiber in my arms burned with the strain of stopping my own momentum. Below me, I could see faces turned upward, tiny white ovals of pure terror. The crowd had gone completely silent, as if speaking might somehow make things worse. Even the news cameras seemed frozen, their operators too shocked to remember they were supposed to be filming. Then I heard it, the sound that still haunts my dreams. A metallic snap, sharp and final, like a bone breaking. The minute hand was giving way. The mechanism let go all at once. I dropped like a stone, the brass minute hand still clutched in my hands, a 15-pound souvenir of my brush with physics. The first canvas awning rushed up to meet me, and I hit it with the force of a small car crash. The canvas held for exactly 1 second before tearing with a sound like thunder. But that second was crucial. It slowed my fall just enough to keep the impact from liquefying my internal organs. I punched through the first awning and immediately slammed into the second one, 15 feet below. This one held longer, maybe 2 seconds, before ripping open like tissue paper. I could feel each tear propagating through the fabric, a zipper of destruction following my body's trajectory. My ribs compressed against my lungs, forcing all the air from my chest in one explosive whoosh. The third awning caught me wrong. Instead of hitting it center mass like the others, I clipped the edge where the canvas met the metal frame. My left shoulder took the full impact against steel pipe, and I felt something give way inside my body. Not quite a break, but definitely not right. The awning twisted as it tore, spinning me sideways, so I hit the fourth one at a completely wrong angle. By this point, I wasn't falling so much as ricocheting, a human pinball bouncing between obstacles that were supposed to save my life but were rapidly becoming instruments of torture. Each impact sent shockwaves through my skeleton. My vision blurred from the repeated jolts to my head and neck. The fourth awning held just long enough to redirect me toward the building rather than the street. My right hip scraped against brick as I tore through the canvas, leaving skin and probably some blood on the wall. The pain was so sharp and immediate that I couldn't even scream. All the air had been knocked out of me 3 awnings ago. The fifth awning was my last chance. I hit it flat on my back, arms and legs spread like I was making a snow angel in midair. For one impossible moment, the canvas held, cradling my broken body like a hammock. I could see the blue sky framed by the edges of torn fabric, could hear the clock tower's damaged mechanism still ticking irregular protests against the morning air. Then the fifth awning tore straight down the middle, and I fell through it like Alice down a rabbit hole. The final 15 feet to the ground felt like miles. I had just enough consciousness left to realize I was about to hit concrete with no more cushioning between me and the pavement. Time slowed again, and I could see individual pebbles in the asphalt rushing toward my face, could count the cracks in the sidewalk that was about to become my landing pad. Some distant part of my brain, the part that had been trained since childhood to fall properly, to turn disaster into survival, tried to position my body for the impact. Roll with it, distribute the force, protect the head and spine. But my body wasn't responding to commands anymore. I was just dead weight now, subject to gravity's final judgment. I hit the ground with a sound like a bag of cement dropped from a truck. The impact drove through me like a jackhammer. My left leg twisted at an angle that legs aren't supposed to twist. Something in my back made a sound like a tree branch snapping. My head bounced once off the concrete, and the world exploded into white static. But I was conscious. Barely, but conscious. The first thing I became aware of was silence. Complete, absolute silence, as if the entire city had stopped breathing. Then slowly, sound began to filter back in. Footsteps running toward me. Voices shouting in Cantonese and English. Words I couldn't quite process, but whose tones spoke of panic and disbelief. Jesus Christ, is he alive? Don't move him. Don't move him. Get a doctor. Get an ambulance. Jackie, can you hear me? The last voice was Sam's, and it was the first thing that penetrated the fog in my brain. I tried to respond, tried to tell him I was okay, but when I opened my mouth, only a wet coughing sound came out. Something warm and metallic tasted of copper filled my mouth blood. I could feel dozens of pairs of eyes staring down at me. The crowd had surged forward against the police barriers, pressing in to see if Jackie Chan was still breathing or if they just witnessed the end of a career built on cheating death. Some were taking pictures. Others were crying. Most were just standing in shocked silence, trying to process what they'd seen. Peter's face appeared in my limited field of vision, his usual professional composure completely shattered. His hands were shaking as he knelt beside me, careful not to touch anything in case I had spinal injuries. "Jackie, stay with me. The ambulance is coming. You're going to be okay." But even as he said it, I could see in his eyes that he wasn't sure. Nobody was sure. The stunt that was supposed to be my masterpiece, my tribute to the silent comedy legends, had turned into something much darker. The canvas awnings that were supposed to save me had instead become instruments of torture, each one inflicting fresh damage as I bounced between them like a rag doll. Lu Wei pushed through the crowd, his face gray with horror. As my stunt coordinator, he'd calculated every element of this sequence, had sworn it was survivable. Now he was staring at his calculations made flesh, broken, bleeding flesh sprawled across unforgiving concrete. The angle was wrong. He was muttering, more to himself than anyone else. The third awning, the angle was all wrong. But the angle wasn't the problem. The problem was that some stunts exist in the space between possible and impossible, and I just learned the difference the hard way. Every precaution in the world couldn't account for the 1,000 tiny variables that separated cinematic legend from cinematic tragedy. I tried to move my fingers and felt a surge of relief when they responded. I could wiggle my toes inside of my shoes, which meant my spine was probably intact. But everything else felt wrong. Joints were loose that should be tight, things hurt that shouldn't hurt, and my left arm lay beside me at an angle that made no anatomical sense. The sirens were getting closer now, their wailing call cutting through the shocked murmur of the crowd. Paramedics would be here soon, would load me onto a stretcher and rush me to the hospital where doctors would catalog the damage I'd inflicted on myself in pursuit of 3 seconds of perfect cinema. But lying there on the concrete, staring up at the clock tower where the minute hand used to be, I realized something that would change everything. I was alive, broken, bleeding, and possibly permanently damaged, but alive. The stunt hadn't killed me, but it had shown me something I'd never seen before. The exact line between human and superhuman, the precise point where confidence becomes delusion and artistry becomes suicide. I'd crossed that line, fallen off the edge of the world, and somehow lived to tell about it. The question now was whether I'd be brave enough or foolish enough to ever cross it again. The ambulance ride was a blur of white lights and urgent voices speaking medical canonese I couldn't quite follow through the haze of shock. Every bump in the road sent fire through my left leg. The paramedic kept asking me questions. What day it was, my name, could I feel this, could I feel that? But me answers came out slurred and wrong. Concussion, I heard someone say. Possible internal bleeding. Left fibula looks fractured. Fibula. I knew that word. Bone. Broken bone. The ceiling of the ambulance had a water stain shaped like a dragon. I focused on that instead of the pain radiating from everywhere at once. Dragons were lucky in Chinese culture. Maybe this one would bring me enough luck to walk again. Queen Elizabeth Hospital's emergency room erupted into controlled chaos the moment they wheeled meth off the doors. Word had already spread that Jackie Chan was coming in, and half the medical staff seemed to be crowding around to get a look at the crazy stuntman who'd finally gone too far. Dr. Wong, the chief of orthopedics, took one look at my x-rays and shook his head. 3 fractured ribs, broken left fibula, severe shoulder separation, and what looks like a hairline fracture in your skull. Mr. Chan, you're lucky to be alive. Lucky. Everyone kept using that word, but lying there with my body screaming in 3 different languages of pain, luck felt like the wrong term entirely. How long? I managed to croak through lips that felt like sandpaper. How long what? Until I can work. Dr. Wong exchanged glances with the nurses. Mr. Chan, you need to focus on walking normally again before you think about jumping off buildings. But I was already thinking about it. Even through the morphine fog, my mind was calculating recovery times, physical therapy schedules, when I could get back on set. Project A wasn't finished. We had 3 more major action sequences to shoot, and without me, the whole production would collapse. Peter appeared in the doorway, looking like he'd aged 10 years in the past 2 hours. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled, and there were sweat stains under his arms despite the hospital's air conditioning. Behind him stood Samo, Lu Wei, and half the crew, all wearing the same expression of stunned guilt. "Jackie," Peter's voice cracked slightly. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck," I said, trying for levity. Nobody laughed. Samo pushed forward, his round face twisted with anguish. "This is my fault. I should have stopped you. I knew something was wrong, and I should have tied you to the roof until you came to your senses. Not your job to stop me," I wheezed. "Your job to catch me when I fall." The joke fell flat. These were men who'd worked with me for years, who'd seen me bounce back from injuries that would have hospitalized lesser performers. But this was different. This wasn't a controlled fall or a calculated risk gone slightly wrong. This was me pushing past the edge of human capability and nearly paying the ultimate price. Lu Wei stood at the foot of my bed, his face ashen. As my stunt coordinator, he'd signed off on every element of the sequence. The canvas placement, the tier patterns, the trajectory calculations. All of it had been his responsibility. Now he was staring at the mathematical proof that his calculations had been incomplete. "The third awning," he said quietly. "I miscalculated the angle on the third awning." "Lou, my friend," I said, "the angle was fine. I just hit it wrong." But we both knew that wasn't entirely true. In the business of professional death-defying, there's no such thing as hitting something wrong. There are only calculations that account for human error and calculations that don't. The difference between those two approaches is often measured in broken bones and emergency room visits. The nurses kept coming in to check on me. Blood pressure, pupil response, pain levels on a scale of a net of 10. I told them it was a 6 because I didn't want to seem weak, but truthfully, it was pushing 9. My entire left side felt like it was on fire, and every breath sent sharp pains through my ribs. "Mr. Chan," Dr. Wong returned with a clipboard full of test results. "We need to keep you for observation. The head injury concerns me. Concussions can be unpredictable, and you took quite a blow to the skull." "How long?" "At least a week. Maybe 2. 2 weeks. Project, it would be dead in the water if I was stuck in a hospital bed for 2 weeks." The investors were already nervous about the budget, and delays would give them the excuse they needed topple funding entirely. 1 week, I countered. "Maximum." Dr. Wong looked at me like I was insane, which, considering the circumstances, was probably accurate. "Mr. Chan, you have a skull fracture. This isn't negotiable." But everything was negotiable in my world. Pain was negotiable, safety was negotiable, even death was negotiable if you were willing to pay the right price. I'd built my entire career on the premise that the human body could be pushed beyond its supposed limits if you had enough determination and good enough medical insurance. That evening, as the morphine wore off and the real pain set in, I lay alone in my hospital room, staring at the ceiling. The water stain shaped like a dragon was gone. Different ceiling, different room, different dragon. This one looked more like a question mark. My father arrived just after visiting hours officially ended, but the nurses let him in anyway. He'd probably bribed them with charm and homemade tea. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, just looking at me, his son wrapped in bandages and connected to machines that monitored whether my body was still functioning properly. "So," he said finally, settling into the uncomfortable plastic chair beside my bed. "Was it worth it?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. 3 months ago, he'd asked me when enough would be enough. Now he was asking if nearly dying for 3 seconds of film had been worth the cost. "I don't know yet," I answered honestly. "Ask me when a movie comes out." He nodded slowly, as if that was the answer he'd expected. "The news crews are outside. They want to know if Jackie Chan is retiring from stunts." Retiring. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I was 31 years old, at the peak of my physical capabilities, finally gaining international recognition for the style of action cinema we'd been perfecting in Hong Kong for decades. Retiring now would mean abandoning everything I'd worked for, everything I'd broken myself to achieve. "What did you tell them?" I told them to ask Jackie Chan. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the sounds of the hospital around us. The beeping machines, the footsteps in the corridor, the distant conversations of doctors and nurses dealing with other people's crises. Outside my window, Hong Kong pulsed with its usual electric energy, Millions of people going about their lives unaware that one of their native sons had almost splattered himself across Causeway Bay for the entertainment of crowds who would never fully understand the price of the spectacle. You know what the worst part is? I said finally. What's that? I can already see how to do it better. The angle on the third awning, the timing of the release from the clock hand, the positioning of the final canvas. I can see exactly how to make it perfect. My father leaned back in his chair and studied my face with the intensity of someone trying to read a map written in a foreign language. And that scares you? No, I admitted. That's what really scares me. It doesn't scare me at all. Later that night, after my father had gone home and the hospital had settled into its midnight quiet, itchy to sleep, but found my mind racing despite the pain medication. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that rooftop, calculating trajectories and impact angles. Every bump and scrape and bone-jarring collision played out in slow motion, and I found myself editing the sequence like a film, looking for ways to improve the performance. The rational part of my brain, the part that was currently wrapped in bandages and hooked up to monitoring equipment, understood that I'd crossed a line. The stunt that was supposed to establish my international credentials had instead become a cautionary tale about the difference between courage and recklessness. Insurance companies would be less willing to cover my projects. Investors would demand safer alternatives. Directors would think twice before hiring the guy who'd nearly killed himself jumping off a building. But the other part of my brain, the part that had been shaped by years of training at the China Drama Academy, forged in the fires of Hong Kong's brutal film industry, was already planning the next sequence. Project A still needed to be finished. The story demanded spectacle, and spectacle demanded sacrifice. As the morphine kicked in and the edges of consciousness began to blur, I found myself wondering if this was how it would always be. If every stunt would push me closer to that edge between possible and impossible, until one day I stepped over the line and never came back. The question that haunted me as I drifted toward drug-induced sleep wasn't whether I would recover from this fall. My body would heal. It always had before. The real question was whether I was strong enough to stop before the next fall became my last, or whether I even wanted to. By my third day in Queen Elizabeth Hospital, the media circus outside had grown into something resembling a small war. I could hear them through my window, reporters shouting questions in Cantonese, English, and Japanese, camera shutters clicking like machine gun fire, the constant hum off news vans idling in the hospital parking lot. Jackie Chan fights for life, screamed the South China Morning Post headline that Peter held up for me to see. The Hong Kong Standard went with Stuntman's last stunt, while the tabloids were even less subtle. Jackie's death wish and the fall that broke Hong Kong's hero. They're saying I might be paralyzed, I said, staring at the newspaper photos of me being loaded into the ambulance. Are they right? Peter folded the papers quickly. You're moving everything. The doctors say you'll make a full recovery. But I caught the hesitation in his voice. Full recovery didn't mean the same thing to a normal person as it did to someone whose livelihood depended on falling off buildings. Full recovery for an accountant returning to a desk. Full recovery for Jackie Chan meant being willing to risk death for entertainment. Peter, what aren't you telling me? He sank into the visitor's chair, suddenly looking every one of his 45 years. Golden Harvest called. They want to know if you're still committed to finishing Project A the way we planned. The way we planned. 3 more major action sequences, each one designed to push the boundaries off what the human body could endure. A motorcycle chase through the streets of Hong Kong, ending with him jumping the bike over a moving bus. A fight scene in a warehouse full of broken glass, where I'd crash through windows and roll across razor-sharp fragments. A finale involving me sliding down a 4-story banister and through a collapsing ceiling. What did you tell them? I told them you were still recovering, and we'd discuss it when you were ready. And what did they tell you? Peter was quiet for a long moment. They said they have insurance deadlines. If you can't guarantee you'll complete the remaining stunts as written, they need to know by Friday so they can make other arrangements. Other arrangements. Code for replacing me with a stunt double or rewriting the sequences to remove the danger entirely. Either option would gut the film's authenticity and probably kill my international prospects. What day is it today? Wednesday. 2 days to decide whether to risk my life again or watch my career crumble. The mathematics of survival had never been quite so stark. That afternoon, Lu Wei brought news that was somehow even worse. The insurance company had reviewed the hospital reports and the footage of my fall. They were threatening to drop coverage for any future productions I was involved in unless I agreed to use safety equipment and stunt doubles for anything they deemed unreasonably dangerous. Unreasonably dangerous, I repeated. That's literally my entire career. Lu nodded miserably. Without insurance, no studio will hire us. Without studios, there's no way to make the kinds of films that built your reputation. I understood the trap I was in. My uniqueness as a performer came from doing things other actors won't or couldn't do. But that same uniqueness had finally caught up with me in the form of a 7-story fall and a stack of medical bills that read like a catalog of human fragility. That evening, Samo arrived with a bottle of expensive whiskey and a grim expression. He poured himself a drink in a paper cup and offered me one, which I declined due to the cocktail of pain medication already in my system. Jackie, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting. I'd known Samo since we were children at the China Drama Academy. We'd been beaten with the same sticks by the same masters, had learned the same lessons about pain and endurance and the price off perfection. If anyone understood the choice I was facing, it was him. I've been offered a job in America, he said. Producer's assistant on a big-budget film. Real money, real opportunity. But I told him I couldn't leave Hong Kong because my best friend was too stubborn to admit he was mortal. The words hit harder than any of my injuries. Samo had his own dreams, his own career to consider. Booth been holding himself back out of loyalty to someone who might be too damaged or too reckless to worth the sacrifice. Take the job, I said immediately. I don't want the job, Jackie. I want my friend to be alive next year. I'll be alive next year. Will you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're planning to kill yourself in installments. The stunt nearly did it. The next one might finish the job. We sat in silence while the weight of his words settled between us. Outside my window, I could see the Hong Kong skyline. Millions of lights representing millions of lives. Most of them lived safely within the boundaries of reasonable risk. People who went to work, came home, raised families, and died in their beds surrounded by grandchildren they'd lived long enough to meet. You know what the worst part is? I said finally. What? I can't imagine being anything else. Samo leaned forward, his round face serious in the harsh hospital lighting. Then imagine being dead, because that's the other option. The next morning brought my father, along with news that made everything worse. The story had gone international. Entertainment Weekly, Variety, even the BBC were running pieces about the Hong Kong stuntman who nearly killed himself for a movie. Some were respectful, others sensational, but all of them carried the same underlying question. Was Jackie Chan's career over? The phone hasn't stopped ringing, my father said. Reporters, producers, people claiming to be your friends. Everyone wants to know if you're going to keep doing stunts or if you're going to mature into safer roles. Mature. Another word that tasted like defeat. Mature actors did romantic comedies and dramas where the most dangerous thing was emotional vulnerability. They didn't hang from clock towers or crash through glass windows or set themselves on fire for the sake of authenticity. What do you think I should do? My father was quiet for a long time, staring out the window at the city that had shaped both our lives. I think, he said carefully, that you've proven everything you needed to prove. You've shown the world that Hong Kong can make action films as spectacular as anything Hollywood produces. You've built a reputation that will last longer than your body will. But proving something and dying for it are two different achievements. His words echoed in my head long after he left. Proving something versus dying for it. The difference between leaving a legacy and becoming a cautionary tale. That night, unable to sleep despite the morphine, I found myself thinking about Bruce Lee, the man whose shadow I'd spent years trying to escape, who died at 32 just as his international career was taking off. Bruce hadn't died doing stunts. He died from a brain aneurysm, as random and unavoidable as lightning. But his death had shown me something about mortality and fame. Sometimes a legend becomes more powerful when the man behind it steps away. Could I step away? Could Jackie Chan exist without the stunts that had defined him? Or would retiring from dangerous sequences mean killing the very thing that made me unique? I thought about Harold Lloyd, one of my heroes from the silent era. He'd hung from clock faces and dangled from skyscrapers, had built his entire career on death-defying comedy. But Lloyd had eventually moved into safer films, had lived to be 77 and died peacefully in his own bed. His reputation had suffered from the transition. If anything, his survival had enhanced his legend. But Lloyd had worked in an era when audiences understood the difference between entertainment and reality. Modern viewers, especially international ones, craved authenticity. They could sense the difference between practical effects and real danger. My entire brand was built on the promise that what they were seeing was real, that I was actually putting my life on the line for their entertainment. Could I maintain that authenticity while prioritizing my survival? Could I find a middle ground between safety and spectacle? The questions tormented me through the long hospital night. Every option felt like a different kind of death. Stop doing dangerous stunts and kill the persona that had made me famous. Keep doing them and risk killing the person behind the persona. By morning, the choice felt impossible, but I knew I had to make it. Golden Harvest was expecting an answer by Friday. The insurance company was demanding guarantees it wasn't sure I could give. The media was waiting to declare either my comeback or my retirement. My father, my friends, my entire support system was watching to see whether I would choose wisdom or self-destruction. And somewhere deep in my injured body, I could feel the familiar stirring of excitement at the thought of the next impossible stunt, the next chance to push past the boundaries of human capability. The same feeling that had driven me to that rooftop 7 stories above Causeway Bay, that had made me believe I could grab a clock hand and fall through canvas and walk away unbroken. The feeling that had nearly killed me. The feeling I wasn't sure I could live without. Friday morning came with the weight of 1,000 decisions I wasn't ready to make. I'd been awake since 4 a.m., staring at the hospital's ceiling and running through every possible future like film reels in my head. Golden Harvest needed their answer. The insurance company needed their guarantees. The world needed to know if Jackie Chan would survive Jackie Chan. At 9 a.m. sharp, I made the call that would define the rest of my career. Peter, it's Jackie. Tell Golden Harvest I'll finish Project A exactly as we planned it. The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought the line had gone dead. Finally, Peter's voice came through, tight with disbelief. Jackie, are you sure? After everything that's happened? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. It wasn't entirely true. I wasn't sure at all. But certainty is a luxury that people in my profession can't afford. Sometimes you have to make the leap and trust that you'll figure out how to land on the way down. The hospital discharged me the following Monday, against Dr. Wong's strong recommendations. My left leg was still in a walking cast. My ribs were taped up like a mummy's chest, and my left shoulder hung at a slightly wrong angle that would never quite correct itself. But I could walk, I could move, and most importantly, I could still take direction from gravity when necessary. The first day back on set, the crew treated me like I was made of glass. Everyone spoke in whispers. Peter had positioned medical personnel just out of camera range for every shot. Lu Wei had triple-checked safety equipment that we'd never bothered with before, padding, harnesses, crash mats that could be painted out in post-production. This isn't how we work, I told them during our morning meeting. If you treat me like an invalid, that's what I'll become. But something had changed, and we all felt it. The easy confidence that had carried us through dozens of death-defying sequences was gone, replaced by the knowledge that we were working in the space between life and death with no margin for error. Every stunt now carried the weight of the clock tower fall, the memory of how quickly triumph could become tragedy. The warehouse fight scene, my first major sequence after the accident, should have been routine. It owned similar sequences dozens of times. But as I stood among the carefully positioned glass panels, I felt something I'd never experienced before: hesitation. My body knew the choreography. My muscles remembered the timing. But my mind kept calculating trajectories and impact angles, kept seeing myself sprawled on concrete while concerned faces stared down at me. For the first time in my career, I was thinking about the consequences before I executed the action. Action, the director called. I threw myself through the first window. The glass shattered around me in a shower of crystalline fragments, each piece catching the studio lights like falling stars. I rolled across the floor, came up swinging, and moved into the next beat of the fight. The sequence played out exactly as choreographed, but something was different. I was different. I'd learned to fall with intelligence instead of just courage. The remaining stunts for Project A were completed over the following 3 weeks. Each one pushed my healing body to its limits, but I managed them with a precision born from understanding my own mortality. The motorcycle jump over the bus, the 4-story banister slide, the warehouse glass work, all of it executed flawlessly, but with a new awareness of the line between possible and impossible. When Project A premiered 6 months later, critics called it my masterpiece. The clock tower sequence, which had nearly killed me, became the most famous 3 minutes of film in Hong Kong cinema history. Audiences gasped, cheered, and left the theater talking about the crazy stuntman who'd do anything for authenticity. What they didn't see were the scars hidden under my costume, the slight limp that would never fully disappear, the way I'd wake up some mornings with my left shoulder, screaming in protest against movements that had once been effortless. My body had become a living museum of every choice it made in pursuit of cinematic immortality. The international response was everything we'd hoped for. Hollywood took notice. Producers from around the world started calling with offers and opportunities that would have been unimaginable before me fall from the clock tower. Ironically, the stunt that had nearly ended my career became the moment that launched it into the stratosphere. But success came with its own chains. Every subsequent project carried the expectation that I would top the clock tower fall. Audiences wanted bigger stunts, more dangerous sequences, increasingly impossible feats of physical courage. The man who nearly died for his art was now expected to keep dancing with death for the entertainment of millions. 6 months after my return to work, I found myself standing on another rooftop, this time in Malaysia, preparing for a sequence that would have me sliding down the exterior of a 30-story building using nothing but friction and prayer. The crew was nervous, the insurance company was apoplectic, and my father had stopped taking my calls. But as I looked over the edge at the impossible distance to the ground, I realized something profound had changed in me. I was still willing to risk everything for the perfect shot, but now I understood the true cost of that willingness. Every stunt was no longer just about entertaining an audience or proving a point that it was about honoring the man who'd fallen from a clock tower and somehow lived to tell about it. The fear was still there, would always be there now. But fear had become a tool rather than an obstacle, a voice that whispered caution without demanding surrender. I'd learned to listen to it without obeying it, to acknowledge mortality without bowing to it. Standing on that Malaysian rooftop, I thought about the clock tower in Causeway Bay. The minute hand had been replaced, the mechanism repaired, and the whole structure reinforced to prevent future Jackie Chans from attempting similar foolishness. But the building still stood as a monument to the moment when a young stuntman from Hong Kong had reached for something impossible and, against all odds, lived to reach again. Years later, journalists would ask me if I regretted the clock tower stunt, if I wished I'd chosen safety over spectacle, wisdom over recklessness. The honest answer was complicated. I regretted the pain I'd caused me family and friends. I regretted the scars that would never fade and the injuries that would remind me daily of my mortality. But I couldn't regret the choice itself. That fall had taught me the difference between being fearless and being brave. Fearless was the word people used to describe what I'd done before the clock tower. Acting without consideration of consequences, throwing myself into danger with the blind confidence of someone who believed he was immortal. Brave was what came after, continuing to push boundaries while understanding exactly what E was risking and why. The clock tower fall became the defining moment of my career, but not for the reasons most people assume. It wasn't about the spectacle or the danger or the fact that I'd survived. It was about learning that the space between life and death isn't just where great cinema happens. It's where great human beings are forged. Every stunt after that carried the weight of that lesson. Every leap, every fall, every moment of suspended animation between earth and sky was informed by the knowledge that I was mortal, breakable, and irreplaceable. The combination of that vulnerability with continued determination to push past human limitations created something that hadn't existed in cinema before. Action sequences with genuine emotional stakes, performed by someone who understood exactly what he was gambling with. As I prepared for that slide down the Malaysian skyscraper, I could feel the familiar cocktail of terror and exhilaration flooding my system. But underneath, it was something new: gratitude. Gratitude for the fall that had nearly killed me, for the lessons written in scar tissue and healed bone, for the chance to keep chasing the impossible with the wisdom that comes from having touched it once and lived to tell the story. I stepped back from the edge, took a deep breath, and began my approach run. 30 stories of concrete waited below, but I was no longer the same man who'd leaped from a 7-story rooftop in search of cinematic immortality. I was someone better, a man who'd fallen from the sky and learned how to fly. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and leave a like. That way, you'll always be with us discovering the secrets and untold sides of the most famous lives in history.